So, in the lead up to World War II, the United States Navy had a problem. This problem was, we're probably going to be going to war, it's probably going to be in the Pacific Theater, and any troops that are in the Pacific Theater are gonna need to be resupplied, and the problem with that is, one, the boats that are launching these resupply planes are not going to be able to launch heavy resupplies. And two, they need to be long-range planes that are going to be doing these resupplies. Along comes a company by the name Consolidated. And they have the answer to those problems. The answer? The Consolidated Model 28, more commonly known as the PBY Catalina. The PBY was produced from 1936 to 1945 with a grand total of 3,308 of them being built, 27 of which were actually built by the Soviets. The initial test model was introduced using two 825 horsepower Pratt & Whitney twin Wasp radial engines, which were later upgraded to 900 horsepower radial engines. Now, the name itself comes from the United States Aircraft Designation System, PB, representing patrol bomber, and Y being the code associated with Consolidated Aircraft as its manufacturer, or original manufacturer, as the PBY would go on to be produced by multiple other companies, including Boeing. These aircraft were often painted a light or dark blue color, although some combinations thereof were achieved. However, there was a specific segment of them that were used in the Pacific against the Japanese for night operations where the whole aircraft was painted black, and those were often identified as the Black Cats. Given their abilities at long-range flight as well as heavy lifting and the ability to land on water, PBYs were used in many different roles. Some of those included anti-submarine warfare, patrol bombing, search and rescue missions, and obviously, given its original design reasons, cargo transport. Later on in the war, the PBY was used more as the eyes of the fleet in the Pacific Theater, giving the crews the ability to be armed while they're doing reconnaissance missions and whatnot. Even though it had been designed for long-range hauls and bombing, it eventually became well known for its role as a maritime rescue plane, saving the lives of hundreds of air crews that had been downed over water, whether that be because their planes simply ran out of fuel or because they had been shot down. So, while last time we heard about the first submarine downed in World War II by the United States, this time the United States Navy's first air-to-air kill was actually completed in a PBY Catalina. On the 10th of December 1941, the Japanese attacked the Cavite Navy Yard in the Philippines. Numerous United States ships and submarines were damaged or destroyed by bombs, bomb fragments, but while flying to safety during the raid, Lieutenant Harmon T. Utter's PBY was attacked by 3 Japanese Zero carrier fighters. Chief Boatswain Earl D. Payne, Utter's bow gunner, shot down one, thus scoring the United States Navy's first air-to-air kill. Utter, the commander of that plane, would later go on to coordinate the carrier airstrikes that led to the destruction of the Japanese battleship Yamato in 1945. Interestingly enough, even though the plane was designed for a war in the Pacific Theater was not the only place that the Catalina saw action. In fact, the Catalina was credited with 40 U-boat kills. Though not without losses of their own, as the U-boats that the Germans were using were actually fairly well armed for anti-air defense. David Ernest Hornell, also known as Bud, enlisted in the Royal Canadian Air Force in January of 1941 and received his pilot's wings in September 1941. He would go on to complete 60 operational missions involving some 600 hours of flying. On the 24th of June, 1944, Hornell was flying as an aircraft captain on a consolidated PBY with the 162nd Bomber Reconnaissance Squadron, RCAF, when he was involved in an altercation. After several hours of an anti-submarine patrol, Hornell and his crew sighted a U-boat that had fully surfaced, and Hornell immediately turned to attack. Seeing the aircraft coming in, the U-boat opened up with anti-aircraft fire, which became very fierce and very accurate very quickly. At about 1,200 yards, the aircraft opened up with its nose guns. Its starboard guns had jammed, leaving only one front gun effective. Hits were obtained on the U-boat, but the aircraft itself was also hit by the anti-aircraft fire that was flying up all around them. 2 large holes then appeared in the starboard wing. Hornell, however, did not care. He continued to carefully maneuver his aircraft in such a way as to continue the attack. Oil was pouring out of his engine, which was by this time on fire, as was the starboard wing of his aircraft. His fuel tanks were in danger, given this fire, but nevertheless, he continued on. The aircraft then continued to get hit over and over and over by the U-boat's guns. By this point, the entire aircraft was vibrating violently and was very difficult to control. Hornell was not deterred. He was a skilled captain and continued to pilot his aircraft in skillful manner. He and his crew, every second that they stayed in this fight, lessened the chances of them getting out in any living condition whatsoever. But still, on he went, piloting this plane to the doom of this U-boat. Perfectly straddling this submarine, Hornell and his crew released depth charges that then blew the U-boat out of the water. Well, not the whole U-boat, but it blew the bow of the U-boat out of the water. Shortly thereafter, the crew were seen in the sea as the U-boat itself sank. At this point, it became a battle for survival. Hornell still had a burning plane, and his engine, which was still spewing oil and on fire, as well as the wing, the engine fell off the wing, right? So the engine falls off the wing, and he's going, okay, well, you know what? It's time to go down. It's time to land. We need to go down to the water. We're a float plane, so that's cool, but we are on fire. So he turns into the wind, and with incredible skill, sets this plane down on the choppy waters of the sea. It's just open water, and he just sets this thing down. Now, an aircraft that is on fire is not a great place to try to continue to survive, so they took to the water using the dinghies that were in the plane. I said dinghies. That's wrong. There was only one serviceable dinghy. This had been an intense firefight, the plane had taken damage, and so had the other dinghies. I'm saying dinghy a lot. Dinghy is a small boat. It's like a survival boat. Yeah. Anyways, this dinghy was the only one that was serviceable, and so the crew managed to get it out of the plane, and the crew could not fit entirely in this little boat. So they took turns. This is frigid North Atlantic Ocean type water, and these guys are taking turns in the freezing water so that maybe they have a chance of surviving. During this process, the dinghy actually gets flipped over. Everybody gets dumped into the cold water again, and after a lot of struggling, they finally get it flipped right side up again. They're still taking turns, but 2 of the crew do succumb to exposure. The surviving crew continued to cling to the outside and inside in alternating, shifts of this dinghy, and at some point an airborne lifeboat was dropped to them, but it fell approximately 500 yards downwind. The men struggled to reach it, and Hornell, who was the captain, offered to go get it himself. His crew restrained him and kept him from leaving the group, as that would have been certain death. This man, even though almost entirely exhausted, would continue to fight for his crew no matter what. After being in the water for nearly 21 hours, the entire crew that was remaining was rescued and brought back to shore. Now, by this time, Hornell himself was blinded and just completely exhausted. Unfortunately, he died shortly after being picked up. Fearing neither the condition of his aircraft nor the cold seas, Hornell, in every instance, displayed bravery and was later posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross. In his memory, a PBY aircraft in the collection of the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum in Hamilton, Ontario, was restored in the colors and markings of the 162nd Bomber Reconnaissance Squadron. Previously, I mentioned the Black Cats. These Black Cats were mostly involved in the Guadalcanal campaign, which stretched from the 7th of August 1942 until about the 9th of February 1943 on and around the Guadalcanal island in the Pacific. These Black Cats would fly down at shipmast height slowly so as not to be detected by Japanese night watchmen. Sure, we'll go with night watchmen. And they would come in with torpedoes and bombs, and they would take out all sorts of Japanese watercraft, effectively destroying thousands of tons of supplies that the Japanese would have needed to be successful in this campaign. Now, since World War II, the PBY Catalina has continued to be a useful aircraft, not only because it can land on water, but because it can actually carry water, which doesn't seem like a great thing when you're initially thinking about landing on, taking off from water, but firefighting actually does require you to pick up water and take it from one place to another. So of the few dozen remaining airworthy Catalinas, the majority are still in use as aerial firefighting aircraft. In an interesting turn, in July of 2023, a company called Catalina Aircraft, the current holder of the type certificates for the Catalina, announced that they intend to build something called the Catalina II, a new aircraft on the basic design principles of the original Catalina, but using turboprop engines and other more modern aviation tools. We'll see if that actually leads to anything, but if it does, that could be one awesome revival of a fantastic plane. So, that's it for me for today. Thank you for joining me as I take a dive into one of the most commonly used floating bombers and scout aircraft of World War II. That's Demonic Maelstrom, signing off. It's a 1940 fly.